In the aftermath of World War II, as the world grappled with the horrors unleashed by Nazi Germany, another, quieter struggle was unfolding in the shadows. This was not the battlefields of Europe, but the intimate and deeply personal arenas of family and identity. The children of Nazi leaders, those who had once wielded immense power and orchestrated some of history's darkest atrocities, were left to navigate a world irrevocably altered by their fathers' deeds. These children, born into privilege and indoctrinated into a ruthless ideology, found themselves at the epicenter of a moral and historical reckoning that would define their lives. Imagine growing up with a name that evokes fear, hatred, and sorrow, a name that carries the weight of millions of lives lost. What does it mean to be the son or daughter of a man the world remembers as a monster? How do you reconcile the love for a father with the knowledge of his crimes? These are not questions with simple answers, and the lives of these children, Gudrun Himmler, Edda Göring, Hess, and others, offer a powerful lens through which to explore the enduring impact of the Nazi legacy. Their stories are as varied as they are complex, filled with contradictions and moral ambiguities. Some chose to embrace the ideology they were raised with, becoming staunch defenders of their fathers and the beliefs they held. Others retreated into silence, attempting to distance themselves from the past, even as they remained inexorably tied to it. Still others dedicated their lives to reinterpreting or even rehabilitating their fathers' legacies, driven by a desire to correct what they saw as historical injustices. Through their experiences, we gain insight into the long shadows cast by history, and the ways in which the past continues to shape, and sometimes haunt, the present. These are not just stories of guilt, redemption, or denial. They are human stories, marked by the same complexities and struggles that define all of our lives. Yet, they are also stories that remind us of the profound and sometimes tragic impact that history can have on those who live through its most turbulent times. As we delve into the lives of these children, we are confronted with the difficult questions of how we remember, how we judge, and how we move forward from a past that refuses to be forgotten. The hidden lives of Nazi leaders' children. The aftermath of World War II left the world grappling not just with the horrors of the Holocaust and the devastation of Europe, but also with the complex legacy of the Nazi regime's leaders. Among the most intricate and haunting of these legacies is the fate of the children of those who orchestrated the Third Reich's atrocities. These children, born into privilege, power, and a deeply indoctrinated ideology, found themselves in a world that had turned upside down overnight. The names of their fathers, once synonymous with authority and fear, had become symbols of evil, and the children were left to navigate a life marked by this infamous heritage. These were not ordinary lives, but ones burdened with the shadows of their fathers' crimes. Their stories reveal how history's darkest chapters can cast long shadows over generations, shaping lives in ways that are often painful, tragic, and morally complex. Take Gudrun Himmler, the daughter of Heinrich Himmler, one of the most powerful and feared men in Nazi Germany. Heinrich Himmler was not just any Nazi leader. He was the architect of the Holocaust, the man behind the SS and the concentration camps. To the world, he was a monster, but to Gudrun, he was simply Poppy. As a child, Gudrun was shielded from the horrific reality of her father's work. She was brought up in an environment that reinforced the Nazi ideology, where Himmler was portrayed as a protector and a loving father. Gudrun's childhood was filled with the privileges of the Nazi elite. She attended elite schools, traveled in style, and spent summers at luxurious retreats. Her father's power afforded her a life of comfort, but it also placed her in a bubble, insulated from the truth of what was happening just beyond the walls of her home. However, as the war ended and the truth of the Nazi regime's crimes came to light, Gudrun's world began to crumble. The man she adored was revealed to be responsible for the deaths of millions. Despite this, Gudrun never renounced her father or his ideology. Even after the fall of the Third Reich, she remained fiercely loyal to his memory, a loyalty that she carried into her adult life. This loyalty was not just a private sentiment but a public stance. Gudrun became a prominent figure in Still Hilfe, Silent Help, an organization that supported former SS members and their families, helping them evade justice or reintegrate into society. Her unwavering support for her father and his ideology highlights the deep and lasting impact of Nazi indoctrination, a belief system so powerful that it transcended the collapse of the regime and the overwhelming evidence of its crimes. Edda Göring, the daughter of Hermann Göring, offers another perspective on the post-war lives of these children. Hermann Göring was one of Hitler's closest allies, a decorated World War I pilot who rose to become the head of the Luftwaffe and one of the most powerful figures in Nazi Germany. Edda was born into a world of immense privilege. She was the Nazi princess, doted upon by her father and idolized by the regime. Göring ensured that his daughter wanted for nothing. She had the best education, the finest clothes, and a life that seemed untouchable by the outside world's harsh realities. But, like Gudrun, Edda's life was abruptly transformed by the fall of the Third Reich. With her father's capture and subsequent trial at Nuremberg, where he was convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity, Edda's privileged world disintegrated. Unlike Gudrun, who chose to publicly defend her father's legacy, Edda opted for a life of discretion and relative obscurity. She retreated from the public eye, rarely speaking about her father or his actions. This silence can be seen as a form of self-preservation, a way to escape the harsh judgment of a world that saw her as a symbol of her father's evil. However, even in her silence, Edda could not entirely escape her father's shadow. Public sympathy was often tempered by the lingering memory of her father's crimes. She lived a life marked by contradictions, being both pitted as a victim of circumstance and distrusted because of her father's name. Her life exemplifies the difficult balance that the children of Nazi leaders had to maintain, navigating a world that could neither fully reject nor accept them. Wolf Hess, the son of Rudolf Hess, presents yet another trajectory in the complex lives of the children of Nazi leaders. Rudolf Hess was one of Hitler's earliest and most loyal followers, famously flying solo to Scotland in 1941 in a bizarre and unauthorized attempt to negotiate peace with Britain. His mission failed, and he spent the rest of his life imprisoned, eventually dying under mysterious circumstances in Spandau prison. Wolf Hess grew up under the long shadow of his father's notoriety and the controversial nature of his mission. While Gudrun Himmler embraced her father's ideology and Edda Göring retreated into silence, Wolf Hess chose to dedicate his life to clearing his father's name. He remained convinced that his father had been a victim of foul play, believing that the British government had conspired to murder his father to prevent him from revealing sensitive information. Wolf's life was marked by a relentless quest for what he believed to be justice. He campaigned tirelessly for the reopening of his father's case, convinced that the official narrative of his father's death was a lie. This belief isolated him, as it put him at odds with the broader historical consensus and further entrenched him in a narrative that kept him firmly tied to the past. Wolf Hess's story is a testament to the powerful grip that family loyalty can exert, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. His refusal to accept the reality of his father's actions or the circumstances of his death illustrates the deep psychological impact that the legacy of the Nazi regime had on the children of its leaders. For Wolf, the past was not something to be reckoned with or moved on from. It was something to be defended at any cost. The post-war lives of these children were, in many ways, defined by the tension between public perception and personal identity. The world saw them as extensions of their fathers, as living remnants of a regime that had brought so much pain and suffering. But for the children themselves, their fathers were not just historical figures. They were parents, complex and flawed human beings whose actions had irrevocably shaped their own lives. This duality, of being both the child of a parent and the child of a war criminal, created a unique set of challenges that each of these individuals navigated in different ways. Some, like Gudrun Himmler, clung to the ideology they had been raised with, finding in it a sense of identity and purpose that the post-war world could not offer. Others, like Edda Göring, sought to distance themselves from their father's legacies, choosing instead a life of quiet obscurity. And then there were those like Wolf Hess, who, unable to reconcile the public condemnation of their fathers with their personal memories, devoted their lives to defending their family's honor. The burden of such a legacy is not easily shed. These children were not just grappling with the loss of their privileged lives, they were grappling with the moral weight of their father's crimes. This struggle was further complicated by the fact that they were often viewed with suspicion and resentment by those around them. The post-war years were a time of reckoning for Germany and the world, and the children of Nazi leaders were caught in the middle of this reckoning. They were living reminders of a past that many wanted to forget, but which could not be ignored. Their very existence posed difficult questions about guilt, responsibility, and the possibility of redemption. For many of these children, the legacy of the Nazi regime was an inescapable part of their identity, one that shaped their lives in ways that they could not control. Some, like Gudrun Himmler, embraced this legacy, finding in it a source of strength and purpose. Others, like Edda Göring, tried to escape it, only to find that the world would not let them forget. And still others, like Hess, became consumed by it, dedicating their lives to a cause that was, ultimately, a lost one. The lives of these children are a powerful reminder of how history can shape not just the present, but the future as well. They show us that the past is never truly gone. It lives on in the lives of those who come after, shaping their choices, their identities, and their destinies in ways that are often unexpected and profound. Gudrun Himmler's unwavering loyalty. Gudrun Himmler's life is a haunting reminder of how deeply ingrained and lasting the influence of a parent's ideology can be, even when that ideology is one of the most reviled in modern history. As the daughter of Heinrich Himmler, one of the primary architects of the Holocaust and head of the SS, Gudrun was not just a bystander to her father's actions. She was deeply embedded in the Nazi worldview from an early age. Her unwavering loyalty to her father, and by extension, to the ideology he represented, persisted long after the fall of Nazi Germany, reflecting the powerful and often insidious nature of indoctrination. Gudrun's childhood was steeped in the ideology of the Third Reich. Heinrich Himmler, a man whose name is synonymous with terror and genocide, was, to Gudrun, a loving and devoted father. To her, he was not the orchestrator of one of history's greatest atrocities, but a caring man who worked tirelessly for what he believed was the good of the nation. Growing up, Gudrun was the darling of the SS elite. She was given a privileged upbringing, shielded from the grim realities of her father's work. She traveled with him, visited concentration camps, which were presented to her as orderly and benevolent institutions, and attended lavish SS functions. In her eyes, her father was a hero, a protector, and a noble figure. This image, so deeply ingrained in her young mind, would prove impossible to shake, even as the world came to know the full extent of his crimes. After the war, as the Allies exposed the horrors of the Holocaust and the true nature of the Nazi regime, Gudrun faced a reality that was starkly different from the one she had known. Yet, rather than distance herself from her father's legacy, she doubled down on her loyalty. This loyalty was not just about defending her father's memory. It was about defending the worldview that had been instilled in her since childhood. To Gudrun, the defeat of Nazi Germany was not a liberation, but a tragic loss of a noble cause. She never renounced her father's ideology, and even as an adult, she continued to justify his actions, portraying him as a misunderstood patriot who had been unfairly vilified by history. Gudrun's loyalty extended beyond just words. She became an active member of Still Hilfe, Silent Help, an organization dedicated to assisting former SS members and other Nazis in hiding. This group, which operated in the shadows, provided financial and legal support to those who had been convicted of war crimes or were on the run from Allied authorities. Gudrun's involvement in Still Hilfe was not just an expression of her loyalty to her father, but also a reflection of her commitment to the broader Nazi cause. She saw herself as a protector of her father's comrades, many of whom she believed had been wrongfully persecuted. Through her work with Still Hilfe, Gudrun helped many Nazis evade justice, allowing them to reintegrate into society or escape to countries where they could live without fear of extradition. The persistence of Gudrun's loyalty, even in the face of overwhelming evidence of her father's crimes, raises profound questions about the nature of indoctrination and the difficulty of breaking free from deeply held beliefs. For Gudrun, the narrative of her father as a hero was not just a story she told herself, it was the foundation of her identity. To reject her father's actions would have been to reject a core part of who she was. This is not an uncommon psychological phenomenon. Many individuals, when faced with evidence that contradicts their deeply held beliefs, will double down on those beliefs rather than abandon them. In Gudrun's case, her father's legacy was intertwined with her sense of self, making it almost impossible for her to see him as anything other than the man she had idolized as a child. Gudrun's story also speaks to the broader issue of how societies deal with the legacies of their darkest chapters. In post-war Germany, the process of denazification was intended to cleanse the country of Nazi influence and ideology. However, the persistence of groups like Still Hilfe, and the continued loyalty of individuals like Gudrun Himmler, shows that this process was far from complete. The fact that Gudrun was able to continue her activities for decades after the war, relatively unchallenged, is indicative of the challenges that post-war Germany faced in fully confronting and eradicating the remnants of Nazi ideology. Her life serves as a reminder that the defeat of a regime does not necessarily mean the defeat of its ideas, especially when those ideas have been deeply embedded in the minds of its adherents. Moreover, Gudrun's loyalty highlights the moral complexities that arise when dealing with the children of war criminals. On the one hand, Gudrun was an innocent child who had no part in her father's crimes. On the other, as an adult, she chose to actively support and defend the ideology that led to those crimes. This duality makes her a particularly challenging figure to understand. Should she be seen as a victim of her father's influence, or as a willing participant in the perpetuation of his ideology? This question is not easily answered, and it reflects the broader dilemma faced by societies in dealing with the descendants of those who commit atrocities. The children of war criminals often live in a moral gray area, where their actions can be seen as both a product of their upbringing and as personal choices that carry their own moral weight. In the years following the war, Gudrun became a symbol for those who sought to rewrite or downplay the history of the Third Reich. She was often featured in neo-Nazi propaganda, where she was portrayed as a martyr for the Nazi cause, a woman who had remained loyal to her father and his beliefs despite the world's condemnation. This image of Gudrun as a steadfast and loyal daughter was used to rally support among those who refused to accept the reality of Nazi crimes, and who sought to keep the Nazi ideology alive. Gudrun herself seemed to embrace this role, often attending events and rallies where she spoke out in defense of her father and his comrades. Her presence at these events lent them a certain legitimacy, as she was seen as a direct link to the Nazi past. This public role made Gudrun a controversial figure in post-war Germany. While many viewed her with disdain, there were also those who sympathized with her, seeing her as a tragic figure caught between her love for her father and the harsh realities of his legacy. This sympathy was not uncommon in post-war Germany, where the process of coming to terms with the Nazi past was fraught with difficulty. For many Germans, especially those who had lived through the war, the line between perpetrator and victim was often blurred, and figures like Gudrun represented the complexity of that legacy. Her unwavering loyalty was seen by some as a form of resistance against the victors of the war, a refusal to fully submit to the narrative imposed by the Allies. Yet, despite the controversy surrounding her, Gudrun remained resolute in her beliefs until her death in 2018. She never expressed regret for her father's actions, nor did she ever waver in her support for his ideology. This steadfastness is both troubling and fascinating, as it speaks to the power of belief and the difficulty of changing one's worldview, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Gudrun's life was a testament to the enduring impact of the Nazi ideology on those who were closest to its leaders. Her story challenges us to think about how ideologies are passed down through generations, and how the children of those who commit atrocities come to terms, or fail to come to terms, with their inheritance. Gudrun Himmler's unwavering loyalty to her father is a reminder of the lasting legacy of the Nazi regime. It shows how deeply the ideology of the Third Reich was ingrained in those who lived within its inner circles, and how difficult it can be to break free from such a powerful and all-encompassing belief system. Gudrun's life is a cautionary tale about the dangers of indoctrination, and about the challenges that societies face in dealing with the aftermath of such a pervasive and destructive ideology. Her story is a stark illustration of how the past can continue to influence the present, and of the ways in which history's darkest chapters can cast long shadows over the lives of those who come after. In reflecting on Gudrun Himmler's life, we are forced to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of loyalty, belief, and moral responsibility. Her unwavering loyalty to her father, despite the horrors he perpetrated, is both disturbing and thought-provoking. It challenges us to think about how we would react in similar circumstances, and about the ways in which our own beliefs and identities are shaped by the world around us. Gudrun's story is not just about the legacy of the Nazi regime, it is about the human capacity for belief, and the ways in which that capacity can be both a source of strength and a source of great danger. Her life serves as a powerful reminder of the need to critically examine our beliefs and the influences that shape them, and of the importance of confronting the past, no matter how painful or difficult that may be. The tragic fate of the Goebbels children. The tragic fate of the Goebbels children is one of the most harrowing and disturbing stories to emerge from the final days of Nazi Germany. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's Minister of Propaganda, was one of the most fanatical and devoted members of the Nazi inner circle. His loyalty to Hitler and the Nazi cause was absolute, and this devotion extended to his family, most notably his wife, Magda Goebbels. Together, they were the epitome of the ideal Nazi family, a propaganda tool in themselves, showcasing Aryan purity and unwavering dedication to Hitler. But as the Third Reich crumbled and the reality of defeat set in, this image of the perfect Nazi family was shattered in the most horrific way possible, by the murder of their 6 children, carried out by their own mother. Magda Goebbels was a deeply committed Nazi, perhaps even more so than her husband. Her devotion to Hitler was such that she saw no future for her children in a world without National Socialism. To her, the fall of the Nazi regime meant not just the end of a political system, but the end of a way of life, a world in which her children could live with dignity and honor. As the Allied forces closed in on Berlin in the spring of 1945, Magda, along with Joseph and their children, took refuge in Hitler's bunker. It was there, in the dark, claustrophobic confines of the bunker, that Magda made the decision that would forever mark the Goebbels family in the annals of history. She resolved that her children would not live in a world without National Socialism, and so she planned their deaths. The Goebbels children, Helga, Hilda, Helmut, Holdine, Hedwig, and Heidrun, were innocent victims of their parents' fanatical beliefs. Aged between 4 and 12, they had been raised in the opulent environment of the Nazi elite, sheltered from the brutal realities of the war their father helped to propagate. The children were often photographed, their images used in Nazi propaganda to symbolize the purity and strength of the Aryan race. Yet, in the bunker, as Berlin was being bombarded and the Nazi regime was collapsing, these same children were seen as symbols of a future that, in Magda's mind, could not exist. She could not fathom the idea of her children growing up in a world without the Nazi ideology, where they might be reviled for their father's actions, or worse, where they might be forced to renounce everything their family had stood for. On May 1, 1945, a day after Hitler's suicide, Magda and Joseph Goebbels carried out their final act of loyalty to Hitler and the Nazi cause. Magda, with the help of Ludwig Stumpfegger, Hitler's personal physician, administered poison to her 6 children. It was said that she put them to bed and gave them a sedative to make them sleep. Then, one by one, she placed a cyanide capsule in their mouths, crushing it to release the lethal gas. The methodical and cold-blooded nature of this act is almost incomprehensible, a horrifying testament to the power of ideology over the bonds of motherhood. Joseph Goebbels, after ensuring his children were dead, followed through with his own suicide pact with Magda. The two were found later, having taken cyanide and, in Joseph's case, also having been shot, their bodies burned in the garden of the Reich Chancellery, in a final, futile attempt to avoid capture by the advancing Soviet troops. The story of the Goebbels children is often overshadowed by the larger narrative of the fall of Nazi Germany, but it stands out as a particularly disturbing example of the way in which the Nazi ideology consumed not just its enemies, but its own adherents as well. Magda's decision to kill her children was rooted in a deeply twisted sense of loyalty and love. She believed she was saving them from a fate worse than death, life in a world where they would be outcasts, their father a disgraced war criminal. In her mind, this was an act of mercy, a final, desperate attempt to preserve the honor of her family. Yet, to the rest of the world, it was an act of unimaginable cruelty, a murder of innocents who had no say in the twisted beliefs that led to their deaths. The psychological grip that the Nazi ideology had on Magda Goebbels is evident in her writings and actions leading up to the final days in the bunker. In letters to her son from a previous marriage, Harold Quandt, who was away fighting, she expressed her despair at the imminent defeat of Germany and her belief that there was no future for her or her younger children. Magda's unwavering belief in Hitler and the Nazi cause had led her to a point where she could no longer distinguish between love for her children and loyalty to the regime. Her letters reflect a mind so completely consumed by the ideology that the thought of her children growing up in a post-Nazi world was intolerable. This level of indoctrination, where the ideology becomes more important than the most basic human instincts, is a chilling reminder of the dangers of totalitarian regimes and the absolute control they can exert over the human mind. The tragedy of the Goebbels children also underscores the broader theme of how the Nazi regime manipulated and exploited the concept of family. The Goebbels family was often paraded in front of cameras as the epitome of Nazi values, a strong, pure Aryan family dedicated to the Führer. Yet, behind this facade was a family dynamic that was deeply dysfunctional and ultimately fatal. Joseph Goebbels, despite his public image as a devoted husband and father, was known for his numerous affairs and his manipulation of Magda. Their marriage, while presented as a model of Nazi domesticity, was in reality fraught with tension and deceit. This hypocrisy is emblematic of the wider Nazi regime, which preached family values while simultaneously tearing families apart through its policies of war and genocide. In the broader context of Nazi Germany's collapse, the murder of the Goebbels children can be seen as a microcosm of the regime's self-destruction. As the Third Reich faced its inevitable defeat, the very ideology that had driven its rise to power became the force that led to its most horrific and self-destructive acts. Magda Goebbels' decision to kill her children was not just an act of personal despair, but also a reflection of the regime's ultimate nihilism. In the end, the ideology that had promised a 1,000-year Reich delivered only death and destruction, not just to its enemies, but to its own adherents and their innocent children. The aftermath of the Goebbels family's demise left a deep scar on the collective memory of Germany and the world. The bodies of the children were discovered by Soviet troops in the aftermath of the Battle for Berlin, a grim reminder of the human cost of the Nazi regime. The image of the 6 lifeless children, laid out in the bunker, became one of the many symbols of the horrors of the Nazi era. These children, who had been used as propaganda tools by the regime, ended up as tragic figures, victims of a war they could neither understand nor escape. In the years following the war, the story of the Goebbels children was often recounted as a cautionary tale about the dangers of fanaticism and the corrupting influence of totalitarian ideologies. The murder of these children by their own mother is a stark example of how the Nazi regime perverted every aspect of life, even the most sacred bonds between parent and child. The Goebbels family, once a symbol of Nazi strength, became a symbol of the regime's ultimate failure and moral bankruptcy. Their story serves as a powerful reminder of the human cost of war and the ways in which ideology can distort and destroy even the most fundamental human relationships. The legacy of the Goebbels children continues to resonate today, not just as a historical event, but as a warning of the dangers of ideological extremism. The tragedy of their deaths forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of belief and the lengths to which individuals will go to preserve their worldview. It challenges us to consider how societies can prevent such tragedies from occurring in the future, and how we can protect the most vulnerable from becoming pawns in the games of those in power. The story of the Goebbels children is not just a relic of the past. It is a reminder of the ever-present danger of allowing ideology to override our basic humanity. In reflecting on the fate of the Goebbels children, we are reminded of the profound impact that political and ideological systems can have on individual lives. The murder of these children was not just a personal tragedy for the Goebbels family. It was a national and global tragedy, a symbol of the depths to which the Nazi regime had sunk in its final days. Their deaths serve as a powerful testament to the destructive power of fanaticism and the importance of vigilance in protecting future generations from the horrors of the past. The story of the Goebbels children is a dark chapter in the history of World War II, but it is also a crucial part of our understanding of the human cost of war and the dangers of allowing ideology to dominate our lives. Edda Göring's post-war life. Edda Göring, the daughter of Hermann Göring, was born into a life of unimaginable privilege and power as one of the most prominent figures in Nazi Germany. Her father, Hermann Göring, was not just any Nazi official. He was Hitler's designated successor and one of the most powerful men in the Third Reich, commanding the Luftwaffe and serving as a close confidant to Adolf Hitler. Edda's early years were spent in a world far removed from the horrors of war, a world where she was doted upon and celebrated as the Nazi princess. Her life was filled with luxury, from the grand estates where she lived to the finest clothes and education. Yet, as the war came to an end, the world that Edda knew crumbled, and she was forced to confront the harsh realities of her father's legacy. As a young girl, Edda was shielded from the grim realities of her father's actions and the true nature of the regime he served. To her, Hermann Göring was not the ruthless architect of war crimes, but a loving and indulgent father. This image of her father as a protective and caring figure remained with her throughout her life, even as the world came to know him as one of the primary architects of the Nazi war machine. In her early childhood, Edda was often seen in the company of high-ranking Nazi officials, attending grandiose parties and ceremonies that showcased the power and opulence of the Nazi elite. These experiences shaped her understanding of the world, reinforcing the belief that her father was a great man, admired and respected by those around him. However, the end of World War II brought a dramatic and devastating change to Edda's life. The collapse of the Third Reich meant the loss of her privileged lifestyle, and more importantly, the arrest and trial of her father. Hermann Göring was captured by the Allies, tried at the Nuremberg trials, and found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. He was sentenced to death, but before the sentence could be carried out, he took his own life by ingesting cyanide. For Edda, this was not just the loss of her father but the destruction of the world she had known. Her life was no longer defined by luxury and power but by the heavy burden of her father's legacy. Edda was only 8 years old when her father was captured, but the impact of his downfall would shape the rest of her life. In the years following the war, Edda Göring lived a life marked by contradictions. On the one hand, she was the daughter of a man condemned by history as a war criminal. On the other, she was seen by some as a victim of circumstances beyond her control. This duality defined her post-war life, as she navigated a world that both pitied and despised her. Edda chose to live in relative obscurity, avoiding the public eye and rarely speaking about her father or the Nazi regime. This silence can be seen as a form of self-preservation, a way to protect herself from the inevitable backlash that would come with being associated with one of the most notorious figures of the 20th century. Despite her efforts to live a quiet life, Edda could not entirely escape her father's shadow. Public interest in the children of Nazi leaders remained high in the post-war years, and Edda, as the daughter of Hermann Göring, was often the subject of speculation and scrutiny. Yet, she consistently refused to publicly denounce her father or his actions, choosing instead to maintain a private life. This refusal to speak out led to a complex public perception of Edda. Some viewed her as a tragic figure, while others saw her silence as a tacit endorsement of her father's crimes. This ambiguity allowed her to avoid direct confrontation with her father's legacy, but it also meant that she could never fully escape it. Edda's decision to remain silent about her father's actions has been the subject of much debate. Some argue that her silence was a form of denial, a refusal to acknowledge the reality of what her father had done. Others see it as a pragmatic choice, a way to avoid the public condemnation that would inevitably follow any discussion of her father's role in the Nazi regime. Regardless of the reasons, Edda's silence contributed to the complexity of her post-war life. She was neither a vocal supporter of her father nor an outspoken critic, choosing instead to live in the shadows of her past. This choice allowed her a degree of normalcy but also kept her forever tied to the legacy of Hermann Göring. The legacy of Hermann Göring weighed heavily on Edda throughout her life, influencing not only how others perceived her but also how she saw herself. In the decades following the war, Edda lived in Munich, where she worked as a legal secretary and later as a librarian. She never married or had children, a fact that some have speculated was influenced by her desire to avoid passing on her father's tainted legacy. Despite living a relatively modest life, Edda continued to receive financial support from her father's estate, including proceeds from the sale of his looted art collection. This financial support allowed her to live comfortably, but it also kept her connected to the darker aspects of her father's life, a constant reminder of the wealth and power that had come at such a terrible cost. Edda's relationship with her father's legacy was further complicated by the public sympathy she received from some quarters. In the post-war years, there were those who saw Edda as a victim of her father's crimes, a child who had been thrust into a world of horror through no fault of her own. This sympathy was particularly strong among former Nazis and their sympathizers, who viewed Edda as a symbol of the persecution they believed they had suffered at the hands of the Allies. Edda herself seemed to have mixed feelings about this sympathy. While she never publicly embraced it, she also did not reject it. This ambivalence further complicated her relationship with her father's legacy, leaving her in a state of perpetual limbo between the past and the present. Despite her efforts to live a quiet life, Edda occasionally found herself in the public eye, particularly in connection with legal battles over her father's estate. One notable case involved the German government's attempts to reclaim looted art that had been in Göring's possession during the war. Edda fought these efforts, arguing that the art had been legally obtained and was rightfully hers. These legal battles kept Edda in the spotlight and brought renewed attention to her father's crimes. They also highlighted the ongoing struggle to come to terms with the legacy of the Nazi regime, a struggle that Edda, as the daughter of one of its most notorious leaders, was intimately familiar with. Edda Göring's post-war life is a testament to the enduring impact of history on individual lives. While she sought to distance herself from her father's legacy, she could never fully escape it. The weight of her father's crimes and the public's fascination with her as his daughter ensured that Edda's life would always be shaped by the past. Her decision to remain silent about her father's actions allowed her to live a relatively normal life, but it also meant that she could never fully confront or move beyond the legacy of Hermann Göring. In this sense, Edda's life serves as a poignant reminder of the ways in which the past continues to shape the present, particularly for those who are born into the shadows of history. In the years leading up to her death in 2018, Edda Göring continued to live in Munich, maintaining her silence about her father and his role in the Nazi regime. Her life, while outwardly unremarkable, was marked by the inescapable burden of her father's legacy. For Edda, the past was not something that could be easily forgotten or left behind. It was a constant presence, influencing every aspect of her life. This burden was both a source of pain and a defining feature of her identity. Edda Göring's story is a complex and tragic one, illustrating the long shadows cast by history and the challenges faced by those who must live in their wake. Edda Göring's life serves as a compelling case study of how the children of notorious figures grapple with their inheritance. Unlike some of her peers who actively sought to distance themselves from their parents' legacies, Edda chose a path of quiet endurance. Her decision not to publicly confront or denounce her father's actions reflects a nuanced and deeply personal struggle with the weight of history. In this way, Edda's life invites us to consider the complexities of guilt, innocence, and the extent to which one's life is defined by the actions of a parent. It also challenges us to think about how societies remember and deal with the legacies of those who commit atrocities, and how the children of such individuals navigate the moral and emotional terrain left in the wake of their parents' actions. Edda Göring's story is a stark reminder that the end of a regime does not necessarily mean the end of its influence. For those who lived through it, and especially for those who were intimately connected to its leaders, the legacy of the Third Reich remained a powerful and inescapable force. Edda's life, lived in the long shadow of her father's crimes, is a testament to the enduring impact of history on individual lives. It serves as a powerful example of how the past continues to shape the present, and how the legacies of the most infamous figures in history continue to reverberate through the generations. The Speer family's complex legacy. The legacy of Albert Speer, Hitler's chief architect and minister of armaments, is one of the most complex and controversial among the Nazi leadership. Speer, often referred to as the Nazi who said sorry, was one of the few high-ranking officials to express remorse for his actions during the Nuremberg trials. However, the sincerity of his repentance has been the subject of intense debate. While Speer presented himself as an apolitical technocrat who was simply doing his job, Historians have since uncovered evidence that suggests he was far more involved in the planning and execution of the Nazi regime's war crimes than he admitted. This ambiguity left a complicated legacy for his children, particularly his eldest son, Albert Speer Jr., who grew up in the shadow of his father's notoriety. Albert Speer Jr. was born in 1934, at the height of his father's career in Nazi Germany. From a young age, he was exposed to the privileges that came with being part of the Nazi elite. The Speer family lived in luxurious homes, and Albert Jr. was educated in the finest schools, far removed from the horrors of the war that his father was helping to orchestrate. Yet, despite the privilege, there was always an undercurrent of unease, a sense that the world outside their carefully constructed bubble was much darker than what they were allowed to see. This duality, growing up in a world of privilege while being surrounded by the moral and ethical decay of the Nazi regime, would profoundly shape Albert Jr.'s life and career. After the war, Albert Speer Sr. was sentenced to 20 years in prison for his role in the Nazi regime, particularly his use of forced labor in the armaments industry. During his time in Spandau prison, Speer Sr. wrote extensively, crafting a narrative that portrayed him as a repentant figure, someone who had been swept up in the momentum of history but who ultimately recognized the errors of his ways. This narrative was largely accepted by the public and the media at the time, allowing Speer to emerge from prison with a reputation that was somewhat rehabilitated compared to other Nazi officials. However, this narrative also placed a heavy burden on his children, especially Albert Jr., who had to navigate the complex and often contradictory legacy left by his father. Albert Speer Jr. chose to follow in his father's footsteps in the field of architecture, but he did so with a conscious effort to distance himself from the dark legacy of the Third Reich. Unlike his father, who used his architectural skills to glorify the Nazi regime, Albert Jr. focused on sustainable urban planning and environmentally conscious design. His career was marked by a commitment to creating spaces that were functional, aesthetically pleasing, and socially responsible. This was not just a professional choice but also a moral one, a way to build something positive in contrast to the destructive legacy of his father. In many ways, Albert Jr.'s work can be seen as an attempt to atone for the sins of the father, to create a legacy that was based on healing and progress rather than destruction and oppression. Throughout his life, Albert Speer Jr. was open about the challenges of growing up as the son of one of Hitler's closest confidants. He spoke candidly about the difficulties of reconciling his love for his father with the knowledge of what his father had done. In interviews and public appearances, Albert Jr. often reflected on the moral complexities of his family's history. He acknowledged the crimes of the Nazi regime and his father's role in them, but he also expressed a deep sense of responsibility to ensure that his work contributed to a better, more just world. This sense of responsibility was evident in the projects he took on, many of which focused on sustainable development, urban renewal, and the creation of public spaces that promoted community and social cohesion. The contrast between Albert Speer Sr. and Albert Speer Jr. is striking and highlights the potential for transformation and redemption, even within families burdened by the darkest of legacies. While Speer Sr. sought to downplay his role in the Nazi regime and present himself as a victim of circumstance, Albert Jr. embraced the need for accountability and change. He recognized that the past could not be undone, but he also believed that it was possible to build a future that was informed by the lessons of history rather than shackled by it. This belief guided his work and his life, making him a respected figure in the field of architecture and urban planning. Albert Speer Jr.'s approach to his father's legacy was not without its challenges. He faced criticism from those who believed that he should have done more to distance himself from his father's name and from the architectural profession that had been so closely associated with the Nazi regime. Some argued that by continuing in the same field as his father, Albert Jr. was perpetuating the legacy of the Third Reich, even if his work was fundamentally different in nature and intent. However, Albert Jr. rejected this notion, arguing that the best way to deal with the past was not to run from it but to confront it head-on and to use it as a foundation for positive change. This philosophy was evident in his work, which often sought to reconcile the past with the present, creating spaces that acknowledged history while also looking toward the future. One of Albert Speer Jr.'s most significant contributions to the field of architecture was his focus on sustainability and environmental consciousness. In a world increasingly concerned with the impact of human activity on the planet, Albert Jr. was at the forefront of the movement to create buildings and urban spaces that were not only functional and beautiful but also environmentally responsible. His work in this area was driven by a deep belief in the need for architects to consider the broader social and environmental implications of their designs. This commitment to sustainability can be seen as a direct response to the destructive legacy of his father, who used architecture as a tool of oppression and propaganda. In contrast, Albert Jr. used his skills to promote harmony between human beings and the environment, creating spaces that were designed to enhance, rather than dominate, the natural world. Albert Jr.'s work also emphasized the importance of community and social responsibility in urban design. He believed that architecture had the power to shape society, and he was committed to creating spaces that fostered social cohesion and inclusivity. This approach was in stark contrast to the monumental, imposing structures that his father had designed for the Nazi regime, which were intended to project power and dominance. Instead, Albert Jr. focused on creating human-scale environments that were accessible and welcoming to all. His designs often included public spaces such as parks, plazas, and community centers, which were intended to bring people together and promote a sense of belonging. In this way, Albert Jr. sought to use architecture as a force for good, a means of healing the divisions in society rather than exacerbating them. The legacy of the Speer family is a study in contrasts, reflecting the broader complexities of dealing with the Nazi past. Albert Speer Sr. was a man who used his talents to further one of the most destructive regimes in history, and while he later expressed regret for his actions, his full involvement in the Nazi crimes has been called into question by historians. His son, Albert Speer Jr., on the other hand, dedicated his life to building a better world, using his skills to promote sustainability, social responsibility, and environmental stewardship. This contrast between father and son highlights the potential for change and redemption, even in the most difficult of circumstances. Albert Speer Jr. passed away in 2017, leaving behind a legacy that is very different from that of his father. His work in architecture and urban planning has been widely praised for its innovative and humane approach, and he is remembered as a man who sought to use his talents to make the world a better place. However, the shadow of his father's legacy continues to loom over his life and work, a reminder of the inescapable connection between the past and the present. The story of the Speer family is a powerful illustration of how history's darkest chapters can cast long shadows, but also how individuals can choose to respond to that legacy, whether by perpetuating it, denying it, or, as in the case of Albert Speer Jr., transforming it into something positive. The Speer family's complex legacy challenges us to think deeply about the nature of guilt, responsibility, and redemption. It raises important questions about how we remember and deal with the past, particularly when that past is as dark as the history of the Nazi regime. Albert Speer Jr.'s life and work offer a hopeful example of how it is possible to confront a difficult legacy and to use it as a foundation for positive change. His commitment to sustainability, social responsibility, and environmental consciousness in architecture serves as a powerful reminder of the potential for transformation and the importance of using our talents and resources for the greater good. In conclusion, the story of Albert Speer Jr. and his father provides a nuanced understanding of how individuals can navigate the complexities of a dark heritage. While Albert Speer Sr. left behind a legacy of destruction and complicity in one of history's greatest crimes, his son chose a different path, one of acknowledgement, responsibility, and positive action. This contrast between father and son offers a powerful reminder that, while we cannot change the past, we can choose how we respond to it and what kind of legacy we wish to leave behind. The Speer family's story is a testament to the power of personal choice and the potential for redemption, even in the shadow of history's darkest moments. The case of Wolf Hess. Wolf Hess, the son of Rudolf Hess, presents a unique and deeply complex narrative within the broader story of the children of Nazi leaders. Rudolf Hess was one of Adolf Hitler's closest allies and confidants, holding the position of Deputy Führer and acting as a key architect of Nazi ideology. His most infamous act came in 1941 when he made a solo flight to Scotland in an ill-fated and unauthorized attempt to negotiate peace with Britain. This bizarre mission ended with his arrest, and Hess spent the rest of his life in imprisonment, most of it in the notorious Spandau prison, where he eventually died under mysterious circumstances. For Wolf Hess, his father was not just a political figure but a man he believed was wronged by history, a belief that would shape his life in profound ways. Wolf Hess was born in 1937, into a world where his father's influence and status within the Nazi hierarchy meant that his early life was marked by privilege and a close proximity to power. Growing up, Wolf was shielded from the harsh realities of the regime his father helped to build. Like many children of Nazi leaders, he was raised in an environment that glorified the Nazi ideology and instilled in him a deep respect for his father. To Wolf, Rudolf Hess was not just a high-ranking Nazi official but a devoted father and a man of principle who believed in the righteousness of his cause. This belief would remain with Wolf throughout his life, becoming the foundation of his unwavering loyalty to his father. The pivotal moment in Wolf Hess's life came in 1941, when his father made his dramatic flight to Scotland. At just 4 years old, Wolf could not have understood the full implications of his father's actions, but the event would come to define his life. Rudolf Hess's flight, intended as a peace mission, was widely regarded as an act of madness, and it led to his immediate arrest by the British. For Wolf, this was the beginning of a lifelong struggle to reconcile the public narrative of his father as a traitor or madman with his personal belief in his father's honor and integrity. This struggle would lead Wolf to dedicate much of his life to defending his father's legacy and seeking justice for what he believed was a grave miscarriage of justice. Wolf's loyalty to his father was unwavering, and it manifested in his tireless efforts to clear his father's name. He spent decades researching and advocating for a re-examination of the circumstances surrounding his father's imprisonment and death. Rudolf Hess's death in Spandau prison in 1987 was officially ruled a suicide, but Wolf refused to accept this conclusion. He believed that his father had been murdered by British agents to prevent him from revealing sensitive information about the Nazi regime and its connections with the British government. This belief became the cornerstone of Wolf's life, driving him to pursue the truth with a relentless determination that often put him at odds with mainstream historians and the official narrative. Wolf Hess's life was marked by a deep sense of injustice and a relentless pursuit of what he believed to be the truth. He became a vocal critic of the British government and the Allied powers, accusing them of covering up the true circumstances of his father's death. This belief in a grand conspiracy was not uncommon among the families of high-ranking Nazis, many of whom struggled to accept the reality of their relatives' actions and the consequences they faced. For Wolf, his father's imprisonment and death were not just personal tragedies but symbols of a broader historical injustice that he was determined to expose. This sense of mission gave his life a purpose, but it also isolated him from much of society, as his views were often seen as fringe or revisionist. The belief that Rudolf Hess had been murdered rather than committing suicide became central to Wolf's identity and mission. He commissioned independent investigations, including forensic examinations of his father's remains, in an attempt to prove his theory. These efforts brought him into conflict with authorities and mainstream historians, who largely dismissed his claims as unfounded. Despite this, Wolf remained undeterred, convinced that the truth was being deliberately suppressed. His persistence in the face of overwhelming opposition is a testament to the strength of his conviction, but it also highlights the deep psychological impact of his father's legacy on his life. For Wolf, accepting the official narrative would have meant accepting that his father was either a fool or a traitor, something he simply could not do. Wolf Hess's life story is a poignant example of how the legacy of a parent can shape and define the life of their children, often in ways that are deeply personal and fraught with emotional complexity. Unlike some of the other children of Nazi leaders who sought to distance themselves from their parents' actions, Wolf embraced his father's legacy, albeit in a way that focused on defending his honor rather than his actions. This loyalty, while understandable from a psychological standpoint, often placed him at odds with the world around him, leading to a life marked by isolation and controversy. His refusal to accept the official narrative of his father's life and death made him a figure of fascination and controversy, but it also trapped him in a past that he could never fully escape. The case of Wolf Hess raises important questions about the nature of loyalty, memory, and the ways in which history is remembered and interpreted. Wolf's life was dedicated to preserving his father's honor, But this dedication often led him down a path that many would consider revisionist or even delusional. His belief in a conspiracy surrounding his father's death reflects a broader tendency among those who cannot reconcile the public perception of their loved ones with their personal memories. This tension between public and private memory is a common theme in the lives of the children of Nazi leaders, many of whom struggle to navigate the complex legacy left to them by their parents. Wolf's story also highlights the broader issue of how societies deal with the legacies of controversial figures. Rudolf Hess's legacy is a deeply contested one, with some viewing him as a tragic figure who was out of his depth, while others see him as a committed and dangerous ideologue who played a crucial role in the Nazi regime. For Wolf, his father was a victim of historical injustice, and his life's mission was to correct the record. This mission, while deeply personal, also reflects the broader struggle within post-war Germany to come to terms with the legacy of the Third Reich. The tension between accepting the reality of the Nazi regime's crimes and the desire to preserve some sense of dignity for those involved is a recurring theme in the narratives of the families of Nazi leaders. In his later years, Wolf Hess continued to advocate for a re-examination of his father's case, even as the world moved on from the events of World War II. He remained convinced that his father had been wronged, and he sought to keep the memory of Rudolf Hess alive, not as a Nazi leader, but as a man who had tried to do what he believed was right. This reframing of his father's legacy was not widely accepted, and it often placed Wolf in the uncomfortable position of defending a figure who, in the eyes of history, was complicit in one of the greatest atrocities of the modern era. Yet, for Wolf, this was a battle worth fighting, a way to honor the father he had loved and admired. The life of Wolf Hess is a tragic example of how the sins of the father can cast a long and unyielding shadow over the lives of their children. His story is one of unwavering loyalty, a refusal to accept the narrative imposed by history, and a relentless pursuit of what he believed to be justice. But it is also a story of isolation, as his dedication to his father's memory often put him at odds with the world around him. In many ways, Wolf's life was defined by the events of 1941, when his father made that fateful flight to Scotland, a decision that would not only alter the course of Rudolf Hess's life but also shape the destiny of his son. In conclusion, Wolf Hess's life serves as a poignant reminder of the enduring impact of the Nazi regime on the lives of those who were closest to its leaders. His unwavering loyalty to his father, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, highlights the powerful grip that family and memory can have on an individual's identity. Wolf's refusal to accept the official narrative of his father's life and death, while deeply personal, also reflects the broader struggle within Germany to reconcile with its past. The story of Wolf Hess is not just a tale of one man's quest for justice. It is a window into the complex and often painful process of dealing with the legacies of history. Conclusion. As we reflect on the lives of the children of Nazi leaders, we are reminded that the legacy of the Third Reich extends far beyond the events of World War II. The stories of Gudrun Himmler, Edda Göring, Wolf Hess, and others show us that history is not merely a series of events, but a living force that continues to shape lives long after the dust has settled. These individuals, each in their own way, were burdened by the actions of their fathers and the ideology they represented. For some, like Gudrun Himmler, this burden manifested as unwavering loyalty and a refusal to renounce the beliefs they had been raised with. For others, like Edda Göring, it meant a life of quiet obscurity, trying to distance themselves from a past they could never fully escape. And for Wolf Hess, it meant a lifelong quest to clear his father's name, driven by a belief that history had wronged him. These narratives highlight the enduring impact of ideology, loyalty, and memory on the lives of those who inherit the legacies of infamous figures. The children of Nazi leaders were not just passive victims of their circumstances. They were active participants in shaping their own narratives, whether through defiance, silence, or advocacy. Their stories challenge us to consider the complex interplay between personal identity and historical legacy, and to think deeply about how the past continues to influence the present. In many ways, their lives serve as a microcosm of the broader struggle within post-war Germany to come to terms with the horrors of the Nazi regime and to reconcile the competing demands of memory, justice, and forgiveness. As we confront these difficult histories, it is important to remember that the legacy of the Nazi regime is not just a matter of historical record, but a living memory that continues to reverberate through the generations. The children of Nazi leaders, like all of us, are shaped by the world in which they were raised, and their stories offer valuable insights into the ways in which history can both constrain and liberate. In examining their lives, we are reminded of the importance of confronting the past with honesty and courage, and of the need to ensure that the lessons of history are not forgotten. The legacy of the Third Reich is a stark reminder of the dangers of ideology, fanaticism, and hatred, and of the ways in which these forces can continue to shape the world long after the men who wielded them are gone. Ultimately, the stories of the children of Nazi leaders are a testament to the enduring power of history and the profound ways in which it shapes our lives. These individuals, caught between the legacy of their fathers and the demands of the present, navigated a world that was often hostile and unforgiving. Their lives offer us a window into the complexities of dealing with a dark past, and they challenge us to think about how we remember, how we forgive, and how we move forward. As we continue to grapple with the legacy of the Nazi era, the experiences of these individuals remind us that history is not just something that happens to us, it is something we live with, something we carry, and something we must actively engage with if we are to build a better future.